Good morning. Welcome to another Balch Nature School at the Fairbanks Museum Kitchen Friday Science. Today, we're going to be looking at composting. We've talked about plants and plant parts, making soil, and this is just another way to make soil. I wonder where's a good place to start once other than using my kitchen scrap bucket.
Well, we have talked about composting, and we talked about some of the decomposers who live in the soil that we made last week. And I remember that you found a worm. I thought it might be interesting to study those guys a little more. Worms are one of the many important decomposers who help us compost decaying matter on Earth. And I know a way to watch the process without digging in the yard or in the compost bin. Let's try vermicomposting.
Vermicomposting, that's interesting. You mean I didn't have to go out and dig in the yard to find my worms for this morning?
You don't. Composting is the process of turning food waste into healthy soil. Vermicomposting is using different types of worms to help with that process in decomposing organic waste. Worms create castings, which are nutrient rich and healthy for the soil. And also, while they burrow in our compost pile, they make holes and tunnels that allow air and moisture into our compost.
That's interesting. That's pretty cool.
It is. Miss Carolyn, do you know what covers a worm?
Their skin?
You're right. And like our skin, a worm's skin protects them from its surroundings. But unlike our skin, a worm's skin also allows it to sense light and dark because they have no eyes. They also breathe through their skin.
Do they have other body parts like we do?
Yes and no. So worms do have skin like us, but they also have setae, which are small hairs on their skin that help them gain traction in the soil. And they do have strong muscles like us that allow them to move through the soil.
Wow. Do they have any other body parts like us?
They do. We both also have hearts that pump oxygenated blood throughout our bodies. We have lungs to gather oxygen and breathe, and worms breathe through their skin. Another difference is that we have one heart and a worm has 5.
5 hearts? Wow. Some days I could use 5 hearts. Yes. What about, do they have a mouth?
They do have a mouth, but their mouth is called a prostomium, and it works like an elephant's trunk to pull the food inside.
That's gotta be it. I know worms don't have arms and legs, and we already mentioned at the beginning they don't have eyes.
That's true. Those are all the parts that we have in common. But there are 2 more parts worms have that we don't. So since we were talking about mouths, I should mention that worms don't have teeth. Similar to a bird, they have a crop and a gizzard. The crop holds small pebbles and sand to help the worm break up materials before it goes into his stomach, which is called the gizzard. It also means it's really important if we're going to keep worms that we need to provide some type of grit for them so they can break down their food. The last body part is called a clitellum, which is their reproductive organs. All worms are both male and female, and both lay a cocoon with 2 to 5 eggs inside.
Okay, well now we know a bit about worms. What should we know about providing them a safe and healthy environment so that they can do their job?
Well, let's get this bin built and we'll figure it out together. Vermicomposting bins can come in many sizes. Some people use very large totes. I'm going to make a very small bin as an example today. The first part we need is a tray for the liquids, because we mentioned worms shouldn't get too wet because, do you remember how they breathe?
Through their skin.
Through their skin. This is a recycled container. I just cut the top off, and I'm going to use this for my bottom tray. And then I found a container that already has holes in it, so I don't have to drill my own. If you were using a larger tote, you would want to be sure to drill holes along the bottoms for water to drain out and along the top for air and ventilation. So this fits right in my bottom tray. The next layer, we're going to put some paper. I was lucky enough, I went right to my recycling center and they gave me a whole bag of shredded paper. I'll put that in the bottom of my bin. I'm going to spray it down because we don't want it too dry. To take a precaution that I don't lose worms, I'm going to take a paper towel and put it right at the bottom. So even though there are holes, they can't crawl through them and get out. Next, that doesn't really look like a yummy place for worms yet. I'm going to put a layer of soil. All right, now a little more water. Now comes the best part. In this tote, I have worms that I borrowed from my friend Shannon. She calls them her pets. They live at her house in her worm bin. Let's see if we can find them. Here we go.
Look at how red they are.
Oh, they're not very big, are they? Not like earthworms you find outside. These worms are called red wigglers. I'm going to set them on top of the soil, and you may notice the soil they came in already has some eggshells, which is another good form of grit for their crop. In you go, little worms. Almost done. There are those red wigglers. I'll give them a little more water, but not too much. Too much water and they'll drown. Not enough water and they'll dehydrate. It's very important that we remember these are living creatures and we need to care for them in just the right way. All right, that looks pretty good. One more layer. So we talked about in composting, we need a layer of brown material. For that, I used paper. You can also use some leaves, which I'll give my friends now, on top. And remember, a worm's skin lets it detect light and darkness. Worms, as we know, live underground, so they prefer it dark. I wouldn't want the top of their bin to be this clear plastic. It would be much too bright for them. So I'm going to have to cover them up with something to protect them. But first, I'm going to give them some apple, some celery greens, a grape, and a little bit of lettuce scraps. Yum, yum. Now, to top it all off, I'm going to add a little more soil. I don't want to push down too hard or hurt the worms. I like to keep it kind of light and fluffy. And they're going to have to find their way around in their new home. And then to make sure that it's not too bright for them, I could add newspaper, cardboard, a paper towel. I think I'll just put a piece of this brown paper bag on top. Tuck them in. There you go, little worms. And to make sure they don't get too dry, I'm going to water that a little bit too.
Looks pretty good. I dug up some worms this morning, but mine look different than yours. And mine, let's see if you can see, and mine are going to want to go back out to the garden where they were living before I dug them up.
You're right about that, Miss Carolyn. Vermont worms can survive our cold winters because they burrow deep, deep into the ground. Did you know they can burrow 6 to 8 feet underground?
No way. And did you know that a group of worms is called a clew?
I didn't know that. I have a happy Clew in my little worm bin now.
You do. And sometimes when I'm digging in my garden, I find clues of worms around particular plants. And usually there's a bigger worm with a bunch of little ones around the dandelion plants. But in those hard, big clumps of soil, that's where I find the great big worm.
It's important to remember that Vermont worms are built for Vermont, but the red wigglers don't need as much space as a Vermont worm. That's why they're the perfect worm to keep inside in a worm bin.
So Miss Libre, if I wanted to start, where would I find red wigglers if they don't grow in Vermont?
You can find red wigglers online if you just look up composting worms. So over time, with our worm bin, the worms are going to eat the food that I put in there, and they're going to make their castings. And when they make their castings, the bin will look like it's now full of soil instead of food scraps. Once that happens, place food only on one side of the bin and alternate sides as the worms eat the food scraps and create their castings. And remember to check the bottom tray for liquids. If you want to, you can use those liquids watered down to feed your houseplants, and you can call it worm tea. It's also important to remember to give them some grit like sand or cornmeal every 3 to 4 months to help fill their gizzard. Since they're not outside to get those things, we'll have to provide them.
Thank you, Miss Libre. That was really fun, and it's another way for us to compost. Thank you, everyone, for coming to our Friday Kitchen Science, and I hope everyone takes time to learn more about worm composting. We will be posting on our Fairbanks Museum website information about vermicomposting, and we'll have a coloring sheet and some other information there. Libre has a friend that we want to thank for sharing her worms.
My friend Shannon Shawkat at the Northeast Kingdom Waste Management District loaned us her worms and gave me a quick lesson on how to take good care of them and have them help me break down my food scraps. This is a very important thing for us to learn how to do very soon. In the state of Vermont, all households will be required to take their organic waste out of their trash and away from landfills. Composting and vermicomposting are 2 very good ways to help us combat that problem.
Yes, that's true. And thank you very much, Ms. Libre. And thank you, folks, for coming to watch our Kitchen Science Friday vermiculture video. Thank you.
Thank you.